Hey folks, how's it going? Here we are. It's June 10th now, morning. To anybody who's watching this while I'm streaming it, if you're at home, watching or listening to this later, welcome. Appreciate it. Of course. So today is gonna kind of be like, I mean, I say abbreviated, that's probably not entirely true. It's gonna take time because the clips that I've got lined up here are pretty, like, they're long, but the idea is that within, you know, for anybody who's been tuning into this so far, you probably are well aware that I go for over an hour most of the time. And that's partly because I mean, I'm not restricted by some sort of big media thing, but additionally, brief discussions of topics like this are not even remotely sufficient, and we got to get into it in a much more deep and meaningful way. And also, like, I want to be clear. I know people, like, there are probably viewers, and I'll start off by dealing with this, but I know that there are viewers who are probably just, like, exhausted hearing about everything that's been going on, and I get that. I get that it's tough to just constantly be, like, dealing with just the overall police and racism problem. It's like, you know, I totally understand the pain of having to deal with, like, some big story coming into media and then sucking the oxygen out. And I'm gonna do what I can here today to try and sort of, like, bridge it a little bit. Something I did want to, like, let people know, tomorrow's live stream, as long as, you know, like, nothing comes up, as things do sometimes, planning on having Lena Barbosa on the stream. We're just gonna talk about some, we're just gonna talk about what's going on, and hopefully just do some listening and some dissection of what the protests mean to who, how we engage in proper discussion, all of that. So that's something that people can look forward to tomorrow. And that'll be at about 1 o'clock. That's when we have it planned. So the regular 11 stream will probably get pushed off to a later time. And that's part of the reason I'm doing this one now, so that I can kind of, like, we can spend tomorrow just pretty well laser focused on that. But what I really, like, wanted to start today with is friend and patron of this channel had, you know, asked, like, okay, well, you know, understandably we're talking about all this and it makes sense, but how does this kind of thing tie into other topics, or how can we discuss some of the more relevant other topics that are that affect us as a community, like housing and education? Now, for anybody who's watched the channel previously, you know that I have spent a lot of time on housing, and I would, you know, like, and it's not that I'm not happy to go back over all that. That's, like, totally a torch I carry, and I will gladly have that discussion anytime. I mean, we have a housing task force meeting this evening on Zoom, so that's going to be great. We've got materials that we're watching and sort of reviewing, getting really into the weeds on that stuff. And so for anybody who wants to sort of catch up on that, you can actually go, the town YouTube page did actually just recently release all of the video of all of the different housing task force meetings that we've had since the beginning. And I, like, that as a resource, like, just, you know, without me putting any of my perspective on it, please just go watch those videos. I mean, I'm in them. I make a fuss a couple times. It's my thing. People know me for that, whatever. but I would say, generally speaking, as far as stuff to look at, check that out. Now, when it comes to housing and education, it's really like, it is definitely, it's hard to separate that from the state level stuff. And the reality is we only have so much control over it here in town. And that's just, it sucks. And, and in a lot of ways that comes down to like, okay, you got to vote for people that are going to advocate for what you want, that are going to demand for the type of spending that you're seeking, all that. So that's definitely a part of it. I think, the way I see education and funding education specifically, it's all like, it's kind of wrapped up in a tax issue. And when I think about that, I think about, well, then it starts to become, it also becomes an economics issue. And that again goes right back into the housing problem. And generally speaking, the issue is there's not adequate subsidy for either, in this instance. And that's going to disproportionately affect people of color in this state, especially because they're a serious minority and they're, for the most part, predominantly living in the more metropolitan areas. So that's why you see a statistic like 95.1% white people in Peterborough, New Hampshire. Like it's just, it's rough. So again, I think to wrap it back around to economics, it's like, look, if we want to not squash the town populations when we try to tax them to pay for education, right? Like, or try to gather money to subsidize housing. I think it's important to think about like the concepts of austerity and the ways in which those public programs don't get adequately funded, so they're not providing necessarily adequate education or adequate space for living, because it's founded off of certain misunderstandings about what's fair to people's liberty when they're paying their taxes, and then the discussion that surrounds that about constructing the right type of structure. And I think that is, a lot of people get a little tight when this comes up, but I mean, at this point, I would say to get a better cohesive understanding of this, and this is something that I'll be talking about as I go through this episode, but then also something that I'll talk about just broadly speaking, because it's an issue I care about, and I think it's utterly pervasive. If you want to look at discussions surrounding inspecting the pillars of racism that keep it up in our communities, you got to address the issue of capital and capitalism, and the way that we emphasize free market economics as the solution to just about every problem here in this country. And that's not even a libertarian perspective. Like, that permeates all the way out to some of the most liberal folks that I know, that there's still a strong grip on the notion of capital as our solution to the problem. So, and in that regard, I mean, without, you don't have to be a communist to read Kropotkin. You don't have to be a socialist to read W.E.B. Du Bois. That stuff is out there and it's available. And I would say, like, it's all good historical primer to understanding what's happening, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, to just like take a minute to inspect capitalism as a structure, and then try and, what I'm doing all the time is to try and engage in critical thinking exercises where I say, okay, like, here's this thing that was observed. How can I apply this, whether right or wrong, to this situation that we're all in right here, and hopefully discern how it, like what parts of it touch us, what parts don't. How does it play into the discussion? Does it illuminate aspects of the issue that we might not have been discussing, which is what we'll get into that a little bit later in this video, this stream today. So yeah, so I hope to the patron who made that comment and personally asked about it, I hope I've given something here. I can't, again, I wasn't like, this has all been very like shotgun stuff lately, and I'm also just trying to strike a balance in my own life with like how much I'm submersing myself, as I'm trying to live in it as frequently as I can, but that also means that I got to spend a lot of time just educating myself, and even like on theory, away from the local immediate issues. Like I have to recognize my own ignorance in that space, and then kind of carve out time where it's like, yeah, my streams might not be able to go as quite in depth on this particular local issue at this particular moment, because I just have to, I got to collect myself if I want to come out here and do a proper service to everybody who watches this. So, so thank you though for bringing that up. 'Cause it was, like it's stuff I want to touch on. And I think, it is absolutely natural for those discussions to precipitate from this discussion. And I don't think there's any way that we can deal with the policing problem without dealing with education and housing, because, and I've said this many times before, that, education is kind of the bedrock of what we're able to functionally complete here. I mean, it really is like, you don't know what you don't know. And if we're not actively engaging in a method of seeking what we don't know, talking to people who know what we don't know, and working that out, then like, it's just not, we're not, we can reform the police all we want, and it still won't make a difference if we don't know what we're doing. We'll end up with something just as different. And I'm not even necessarily a reformer. I have my own personal opinions about it. I won't get into it. I want to work on, I also believe that like, you're not going to get rid of the police tomorrow. Like anybody that thinks that is just, you get like, we're like, people say abolish the police, and it's like, that's just not how that works yet. Like, it's a process. It doesn't mean that you don't demand for really like high moonshot level stuff, because you do. That's the only way to get the meaningful change to occur. But you have to be somewhat realistic in like what you're actually able to achieve at a time. And I'm not saying that like that needs to be shared with your opposition. You don't need, you should never let your opponent know just how much you're willing to concede when you're walking in. You don't walk into a negotiation thinking I'm walking into a negotiation. You walk into a negotiation saying I'm going to get what the hell I want. So, continuing on, the prominent, obviously probably the biggest reason that I'm doing this stream today is to go over some of what was discussed in yesterday's select board meeting, which got like pretty intense for anybody that tuned in. I'm actually like, for the sake of, there might be a little bit of wonkiness to the screen movement today, and I apologize to anybody in advance for that I'm sort of, the real-time production is a very serious thing that happens here. And I'm doing these stream solos. Most people know, and I've said many a time. So if you just, bear with me on the scrappiness of the stream, if it's a little bit looser today, I apologize. At any rate, this is the Zoom meeting of yesterday's select board meeting. I'm sounding redundant here. I've kind of hopped over the initial stuff. I will obviously have the link for folks. If you didn't get a chance to tune in live, please go watch the thing in its entirety after the fact. It's up there. It's not going anywhere. Our town has been great about making sure that these video resources are now just like readily available to everybody at all times. It's awesome. It's like, I'm so happy about it. Super, super pro, all that. So I'm not going to deal with like the whole first half of just sort of like the intro stuff. I'd like to, Guinard did share actually, no, you know what? I take that back. I will go to the top and we'll address some of this stuff. I just need to take down a timestamp of where I'm at right now. Okay. So let's see here. Right now in the meeting, what we're looking at is we are looking at the continuum of force. And actually, hold on one moment. Because the way that Zoom does this is they put the person at the top right. So see what I mean? Real time production, folks. Okay. So this is Chief Guinard, and he's going to talk a little bit about continuum of force and the Standards and Training Council. I'm just going to let this stuff roll for a minute. Actually, hopefully maybe reel it back a little bit. Okay. So here we go. We'll just let this pop for a second, and I'll sort of respond to it in real time.
Police Standards and Training, and it's actually referenced in a document which is typically attached to use of force policies across the state of New Hampshire. And that is local, county, and state police. And if you follow it, professional presence, that is where you're in verbal direction, that is where your de-escalation and communicating with people typically takes place. And if that fails, then it moves on to what you see as soft hand control. That can be simply using hands to hold on to somebody, or what is referred to as OC, oleo capsicum, in other words, pepper spray. And then it moves on from there to hard hand control, impact weapons, chemical agents, and then all the way up to lethal force. And obviously the goal of every police officer is to maintain control of any situation that they're presented and not have to move beyond the verbal direction and into other types of force. Thank you on that, Nicole. Training is controlled in the state of New Hampshire by the New Hampshire Police Standards and Training Council. New Hampshire is somewhat unique. We have one police academy, which is located in Concord, New Hampshire, for all New Hampshire law enforcement. That's local police, county police, and state police. We all attend the same academy, same classes. And that's actually a good thing in many ways. New Hampshire RSA 106L:3, and that'll pop up in a moment. These are the people who control the academy, who decide what types of training will be presented to law enforcement throughout the state of New Hampshire. And every year they get together, and they're required to quarterly, but they'll, with input from the academy staff, they decide what the training will be for the forthcoming year for all New Hampshire law enforcement. And although that may be difficult to read what's in front of you, the council is made up of a variety of members. 2 members are police chiefs from local towns such as Peterborough or smaller, sometimes larger, 2 city police chiefs, 2 members that are county sheriffs, 2 members that are judges with the courts here in New Hampshire, the chancellor of the community college system of New Hampshire, the director of the state police, which is usually the colonel or a designee, the attorney general, the commissioner of the Department of Corrections, and 2 members, neither of whom, 2 members of the public, neither of whom are police officers, lawyers, judges, and none of them have relatives that are lawyers, judges, or police officers either. So this is an opportunity for at least 2 members of the general public to be involved in this process.
Okay. So for folks, like, I had discussed this. I had discussed this in last week's live stream. And it's coming up again, this specific, this right here. Now, the police like, all right. What I talked about last week is like, and a bunch of us got, I asked the question in here, and we'll get forward to that, for sure. That, like, just objectively speaking, two citizens can get involved in this council. Guess what? That's a minority. And if those 2 citizens were like super against the entire rest of the council, those 2 citizens are going to get completely shut out. So, like, when people say this is the institution protecting itself, that's exactly what they mean. They've set it up so that their training council in of itself is not actually capable of having an internal check on its own collective bias, right? Like, everybody that he listed off is somehow associated with the criminal justice system. And, you cannot exist without bias. You just can't. Everything that you ever learned, everything that you ever saw or heard or whatever, that's all, that is what implicit bias is. It is what subjectivity is. And you're not going to escape that. And you have to acknowledge that if you want to have something that balances, right, you have to include the other side of that. Even if the other side of that is wrong, then you got to, because you have to defend that stance, right? Now, so I want to get to why, right? Like, separately, I want to get to the why this is an issue part. And this is it right here, okay? This is on InDepthNH, but there was also an article in Union Leader, which I'm paywalled out right now, so I can't look at it. And I would love to pull up the Union Leader article, because everybody knows they're a hyper conservative publication, despite every cry that they could possibly make to the other these days. It was unbiased journalism. But realistically, this is what we are concerned with. So when Chief Guinard points to this, the Standards and Training Council as like, well, we have this so we can protect, and this is going to keep us safe, and this is it works and it's functional. We really have something strong in place. Okay, well, let's examine that here. So state audit reveals problems with police oversight in New Hampshire. How about them apples? Let's scroll down. So first off, here is your list of the members of the Police Standards and Training Council. Okay, so we can all have a nice clear look at who we're talking about. 85.1% of the respondents were satisfied with the training recruits received. Again, that's internal, so we're they're satisfied with their own work. That's that's good, I guess. PSTC was tasked with enforcing statutory standards and furthering develop the minimum standards of law enforcement officers, implemented these directives using a series of applications, affidavits, and administrative processes. However, these procedures omitted crucial standards required by statute, such as drug and psychological screenings. Documentation demonstrating compliance with PSTC standards was inconsistently completed by law enforcement hiring authorities, was inefficiently collective, and went largely unaudited by the PSTC. Although the complaint and disciplinary processes were generally effective at ensuring most officers participating in egregious misconduct would be identified and disciplined, the processes contained gaps in jurisdictional authority and reporting mechanisms. This is what we, the citizens, are talking about when we say the system is like it's blind to its own inefficiencies and it's not equipped to deal with them, right? For example, law enforcement agencies could suspend an officer for a long period of time for dishonesty or disrespecting the law, but these specific instances of misconduct would never come before the PSTC unless the officer was discharged, involved in a criminal matter, or found to have possessed or used a controlled substance. Again, layers of Yankee handshaking. Like, this is some classic New England shit right here, folks. While we note training operations produce generally positive survey results from graduates and hiring authorities, again, all people within the system, not public people outside of this, not social workers, not necessarily external mental health professionals who are brought in to audit for the good of the public. We found the curriculum development process lacked assurance that recent curriculum decisions were made effectively based on a current job task analysis. So I'm going to read that again. We found the curriculum development processes lacked assurance that recent curriculum decisions were made effectively based on a current job task analysis. So they, we can't be assured in their ability to analyze themselves, which is exactly what I'm talking about right here, okay? Oh, man. You're asking folks to see their bias when the basic premise is that they are unable to see their own bias, and that's the issue. And, like, you can't do that without having some sort of external pressure, right? And that's functionally what having an equal weight of non-justice system officials, citizens who have no relationship to the criminal justice system or law enforcement system whatsoever, right? Like, that's why you have equal weight on something like the Standards and Training Council, okay? Additionally, inconsistent management of instructors resulted in the inefficient use of instructional resources by allocating PSTC staff at a time to monitor non-PSTC instructors. So they're spending more time investigating the people that are doing the assessment, right, that they bring in to determine if there's anything wrong with their people than they are actually trying to figure out if there's anything wrong with their people. We also found the overall management of the PSTC operations was hindered by a lack of fully developed strategic plan. Dude, what the hell? Performance and risk management systems and a less than fully functional electronic database. Come on, dude. Come on. Like, this is from March 2019. This is like a year ago. Like, come on. Oh, wow. So I'm sorry, but I respect the chief for what he's doing here. I know he's trying to do a good job, but man, you are bringing up an institution that is fundamentally flawed and asking us to trust it. Why? That's my question. Why should we trust this establishment when we barely have any control as citizens over, like, outside of the criminal justice system, what happens or what decisions get made within this? They're not really great administratively anyways. And then like they're not even holding the base standards, and yet they exhibit all of the, the control over our police force. And then our police come to us and say, we really need you to trust this broken institution. You got to trust this broken institution because it means well. Like, I'm sorry. It's like that. You know what would mean well? Complete transparency would be meaning well. We found this potentially limited the PSTC's ability to monitor and measure organizational performance and risk. Inefficient information systems burdened both the PSTC staff and law enforcement agencies with additional administrative tasks. Yeah, that's not good. As a public regulatory body, the PSTC was also required to conduct transparent meetings free of conflict with proper statutory authority. Nevertheless, we found some meetings lacked quorum due to non-compliance with financial disclosure requirements and inconsistent recusal practices. Yo, what did I just say about capital? Okay. Follow the money. Always, always, always. Like, follow it. If for a moment there's any illusion, right, about the role of money in politics, law enforcement, oppression, society, like our psyches, if you think that you can actually meaningfully engage in this conversation without ever talking about money, come on my channel and let's have a discussion. Please. Because I and I'll get into it a little bit later, but with the with hopefully the more entertaining section of this. Let's just finish this off. This is so annoying, man. Lastly, the PSTC frequently conducted disciplinary hearings in a non-public session under questionable and inconsistent authority, which may require further consideration by the legislature and more explicit guidance from the Department of Justice. If this is not reason for us to not trust this institution, I genuinely do not know what's good enough. Really, if after reading this article and then going back and trying to listen to we'll get there, let's do it. Let's just hop right back into this. Of course, it's the natural thing. So here we go.
And they are involved in that process. Thank you, Nicole. Training is something we take here very seriously, especially when it comes to things such as the use of force. New Hampshire RSA 627:5 is where New Hampshire law enforcement gets its authority to use force of any type. And it's a rather lengthy statute, but if you want to read it at some time, it lays out non-deadly force all the way up through deadly force. And you'll see the word in there, reasonable or reasonable belief, okay? And that is key in that statute. What I've done here over the years is I have certified instructors in-house. And every year we do refresher training. I have certified firearms instructors, defensive tactics instructors, taser instructors, and pepper spray. They're certified and recertified annually. Now, when we do our annual use of force training, we do policy review and all of those other items that I just mentioned. We go over them in great detail. We talk about recent Supreme Court decisions that may have come down as a result of using them. So it's pretty comprehensive what we do. At the recruit level academy class and the annual training calendar that comes on, in New Hampshire, there isn't a tremendous amount of training when it comes to things such as race, okay, and racial issues. What they do have is cultural diversity training, community policing, constitutional law, and communicating to resolve conflict, crisis, and trauma. That's the best that I could find in the recent training calendar. Through the discussions that I've recently had with other New Hampshire police chiefs, to include the people at the police academy, there's much discussion beginning as we speak through the council that I've described, the members of the police academy, the New Hampshire Chiefs of Police Association, and the Attorney General's office about the need for more training in racial and ethnic issues.
I would love to hear those conversations. Honestly, after reading that piece, I would love to know what those conversations actually entail, because mainly because I just want to hear how tone deaf they are. Like, cool, you guys are talking. What are you talking about? Oh, we need to do better. Yeah, of course you do. Like, how much do you know about how much better you need to do? Because clearly there's evidence from March of last year that points out that you guys aren't even good at auditing yourselves. Now, I don't want to single out Chief Guinard here, because I don't, I can pop back over him, and I don't think he was on that list. Actually, yeah, do it right now. Nope, but we got Capano from Manchester. So look, why should we trust in those conversations? Like, and that's the thing, is that we as a group of citizens who are upset about this are saying, no, the basis of this is actually what's broken. Like, we're asking for another level of assessment. And I know that it's like, we're doing what we can. I hear that. We're asking for a higher order assessment. We're asking to dig deeper. We're asking to dig into like the philosophical value of these institutions in their inherent existence. And it's not even about us trying to attack them or dismantle them so much as, like, we as citizens have a right for them to work the way we want them to, period. And if the people within those institutions start getting really upset that we're demanding that they do their jobs, then those institutions are fundamentally broken. Okay. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to hop forward to the Q&A part where they're actually talking about, or they're responding to the questions that were coming in live on Facebook. Because this is obvious, as far as I would say, and Facebook and email, I would say this is kind of where things start to get more intense, because it's like the real time thing. So we'll get going here.
This one is from I think it's either Leela or Lila Titleman. Says, I'm a teacher in Peterborough, and though I'm unable to attend the meeting tonight virtually, I'd like to ask some questions regarding Peterborough Police's response to the recent call for transparency and condemnation of the use of unethical force. Based on your recent statement, I do not feel there is a clear path forward in terms of policy. I would hope that everyone is ready to admit things need to change. That being said, my question is in regards to the police's relationship to mental health professionals. Does the police department have a strong network of mental health workers who are ready and willing to take on emergency calls that are clearly better handled by those providers? What mental health training does the Peterborough Police currently have, and how can that be bolstered?
Crucial question.
Do the police have the ability to assess when someone is in need of care and use healthy tactics to get them to a facility that would best serve them instead of using authoritative and intimidating tactics. Thank you for your time. Hope that some of my questions are addressed.
Oh, okay. That's a
So
lot.
having to do with mental health issues, and that's a question, Chief, that I have as well, because I do think, you know, we have asked our police to do an awful lot, and so many of the calls that they get really do have mental health issues going on, whether that's addiction, alcoholism, domestic violence, a whole range of things that that folks are dealing with, that when help is called for, our police are the first responders. So just wondering how that works, and she is as well.
Okay. Mental health evaluation for first responders is, there are classes that the Police Academy offers there. We're the ones that are expected to do what's called an involuntary emergency admission process. And that is the creating of what's called a complaint in prayer. And we typically help families with that when somebody needs to be taken to a facility to be evaluated and they don't want to go. But unfortunately, that does require the authoritative piece of it that it sounds like she kind of frowns upon, and I get that. We do our best to try to, if we're called to a home, to talk a family member in to going and speaking to a crisis counselor, and usually it's at Monadnock Hospital. We even go so far as to offer them a ride to get there.
Okay, I gotta
do what we can there.
I gotta pause this for a
is-
second, because that's not, he's just not answering the question. The question is really about, like, what are the resources, and he's saying, well, this is what we were trained to do, and I don't, you know, I'll let it roll a little bit more because I can't recall if he actually, like, does really respond to this, but I, you know, just keep an eye out for this, that he's not actually, like, he's giving a different answer than what was asked of him to respond to.
Is that an area that could probably use more training for first responders? I would say probably should. Yes.
Well, I just want to say, Chief, that I think, you know, what we're talking about here is an overall kind of systems issue, right? Because it's what we're asking our police officers to do is not really their expertise. You know, when you're encountering a family in crisis, you need other kinds of skills, right? Than what typically we expect our police officers to have. And
huge shout out.
And I think, you know, a lot of what the conversation is right now is how do we bring more of that kind of social work, you know, component into responding.
And that's going to be the crux of a lot of what I say here.
For me, that sounds more like a systems change kind of issue versus a failing of some kind, you know, on the police department's part. It's that we've set it up, so we're asking the police officers to do so much that I think we just need to be thinking about this differently.
Societal issue.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for answering that.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
So yeah, I mean,
I think maybe
I still, it, you know, like, I would have really appreciated hearing, like, how much do you guys talk to the hospital? Do you have mental health professionals that you're able to work out relationships with? You know, obviously you're talking about what you do to get people to it, but what's your active, what are you actively doing to, like, involve those people at the time of incident, not after incident, right? This is like, this still understanding it in terms of, like, well, you need to have authority intervene like this, and no, the whole point is send somebody completely outside of it, because you guys are a monopoly of violence. Like, that's what the police are. They have monopolized violence. They're a state-sanctioned gang. I'm sorry if that's triggering for folks when I say that, but I would encourage you to describe to me how they are not. Okay, like, anybody wants to come on and debate the concept of police as a state-sanctioned gang, be my guest. Happy to have that conversation anytime with anybody from any political persuasion. super happy to do it. But like, you're talking about like, what is the inherent moral and philosophical function of this group of people? Well, it's to be the keeper of the weapons and the violence, and they're the ones that are granted the power to do it, and they discern in real time whether or not they do that. It's not their training to know how sick you are. It's not their training to understand how to read your demeanor for life experiences and needs. It's about learning how to read your demeanor for threat level. Like, it's all couched in this context of combativeness and opposition and violence. And that's the structural problem. And it's really hard to get a cop to think about that, because like, this is his livelihood. Like, it's what he's been doing for decades. And I don't fault that. Right? Like, that's like, and that's important, right? Like, we, like, I can not fault it and still be disapproving, like and that's not giving somebody credit. It's just acknowledging a thing that's going to happen. Right? Like, and I don't want us to confuse those. Right? Like, that's like, especially in like interliberal conversation, that's absolutely like the first thing is like, people don't operate on the same definitions of stuff, and if we're not gonna like, and when someone starts challenging definitions, people usually start to get really triggered about it. Like, and I hate using that word, but like, set off, like, you get frustrated and get involved, you get heated, you start saying stuff, start making ad hominem attacks, and like, it's a mess. So, okay. I've ranted enough on that one. Okay. We keep rolling.
We have had some questions come in via Facebook Live. I think I'll jump to a few of those for the chief to get to before we get too far off. They refer to answers to questions earlier or information given. Carter Hammond asks, can anyone speak to why there are only 2 members of the public involved in that training council? And then, sorry, the follow-up from Sarah Steinberg Heller is, I would also like to know how we can get more members of the public involved. 2 seems meager.
Now, to be fair, I kind of like, I'll say this. I mean, like, I asked the question somewhat rhetorically. I already know the answer to this. I wanted... because frankly, I'm not enough of authority and authority on this to be the person to say it and have people listen to it. But I know that they literally are the authority. So if I can get them to like forcibly respond to this in a meaningful manner, and Nicole's a good person. I like Nicole. At least, from every interaction that I've had with Nicole, it's been positive. So I'm glad that we can get like an action, I just wanted to get the response, and I'm glad that Sarah did her follow up on like, how do we, what can we do to affect that change? So I'll let this roll. Here's the answer that I was hoping that we would get.
I can speak to that. That's simply how the legislation was written when that law was enacted that put that council into place. And so any change to the composition of that council would require more legislation, more action by the state legislature.
Yeah, the council actually answers to the executive council and governor. So that may be a good starting point, is to communicate with somebody from the executive council.
There you go. That's a good way to go about it. Correct. That's how we change our RSAs and our laws in New Hampshire, right?
Exactly.
And then Zachary Zalman Green asks, where can we find these records from 2006 to today?
Well, I have them here, but they're not a matter of public record. What I would have to do is these use of force reports that I would have to redact names, dates of births, phone numbers, addresses. And give them, they'd have date, time, location, and they'd have a brief synopsis of what took place, again, with that information redacted, social security numbers and things like that.
The follow-up right now, Zach's literally asked in the chat at the time, can we get the redacted version?
We would need to see a request. So right. It's a pretty simple process. Someone just whoever's interested in seeing those records can put together a request for the records, indicating what they're interested in seeing, the time period, if they can put that in writing. Because like Chief said, that, you know, there's a lot of private information in these records. We need to go through a bit of a review process before we release them. But we'd certainly work with the requester to make sure they get access to whatever documents are available for them to inspect.
Freedom of information.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. There may be follow-up questions once we've answered these, but we'll get to them in line here. I'm just going down the list. Carter Hammond asks again, can we get a publicly released report of which classes are chosen and a report of the assessment? I assume you spoke to.
Okay, so I don't think I showed this clip earlier, so I want to sort of preface this by saying, like, the chief describes a situation in which, you know, they have these, you know, these trainings that come up through the PSTC, and, you know, there's he and the captain sort of like look at what they've got to offer after their officers submit requests. They, you know, approve or don't approve this stuff. It's like an internal process of, like, you know, what I'd like to know is not only, like, what is everybody trained in, but, like, why did we choose to, say, send this officer into this particular training thing? Or why do the chief and the captain feel like this right now is the type of training that that our officers need to be receiving? And it's not, you know, like, again, it's not oppositional. It's just, I just want to know, like, hey, what are you guys thinking? Just tell us what's up. You know, like, that's just a request. Like, hey, if you tell me what you guys are thinking, then, like, I feel safer. You know what I mean? Like, I know what's up. We're in communication. You're involved in your community. So I know what officers need, you know, like, maybe we as community members can help those officers to get what they need too. You ever think of that? Like, we might be able to assist our officers in learning what they need to learn, like, if you share that information with us rather than blocking it off, because maybe there's something that we know as the populace that has a much broader dynamic of knowledge. Now, not everybody has all the knowledge, but collectively, yeah, we are all, we exceed expertise in many areas. So why not why not turn to your public who might have a completely different understanding than the psychiatrist that the PTSD was having a hard time sorting out anyways and auditing. And it's like, well, dude, why don't you let us get involved? I don't know. So, yeah, just sort of that little bit.
Classes for officer training that are chosen.
Yeah, that would, okay, when you say chosen, that we elect to send people to, or?
Yeah.
I assume that's what the question is referring to.
Yeah, because the classes in the state, typically the classes in the training aren't electives. You don't choose the basic training courses. It's just, these are the courses that you must take. And you must pass to be an officer.
And this is the point where I'm saying, like, hey, no, he literally says earlier in this video, and I don't know, maybe I'll maybe I can try and find the spot, I guess, like, because now I sort of feel like I gotta, you know, like, if I want to make my point here, I don't want to sound like I'm full of it. So, let's see if we can hop to it.
All of those other items that I just mentioned, we go over them in great detail. We talk about recent Supreme Court decisions that may have come down as a result of using them. So it's pretty comprehensive what we do. At the recruit level, academy class, and the annual training calendar that comes on, in New Hampshire, there isn't a tremendous amount of training when it comes to things such as race. Okay, and racial issues. What they do have is cultural diversity training, community policing, constitutional law, and communicating to resolve conflict, crisis, and trauma. That's the best that I could find in the recent training calendar. Through the discussions that I've recently had with other New Hampshire police chiefs, to include the people at the police academy. There's much discussion beginning as we speak through the council that I've described, the members of the police academy, the New Hampshire Chiefs of Police Association, and the Attorney General's office about the need for more training in racial and ethnic issues in the state of New Hampshire. So we will be seeing that in the days, weeks, and months to follow. One of the things, I went through some of our records today, and this is something I'm actually quite proud of when it comes to the use of force. In 2019, the Peterborough Police Department made 399 arrests through an athletic field at one of the schools here in Peterborough, finding a cigarette for him to smoke.
He's telling a story that I like. Maybe I'll get into it in a different episode, because this is like one side of a story that he tells here, and I don't have the time for it today, but I don't want to, I do kind of want to roll back to that at some point.
From there, it's up to the law enforcement agency to decide. I'll do my best to answer these. I'll read the question and then provide the answer that we were able to come up with. These were sent in by a Peterborough resident. The first question, number one, what is entailed in our state's police training? I think I've already gone over that with you as far as how training is set up for all law enforcement in the annual training calendar, which is distributed to all law enforcement agencies. From there, it's up to the law enforcement agency to decide what classes they're going to send which officers to.
Hence choose.
And the way we do that here is myself and the captain get together and we do an assessment over where we feel the department as a whole or individual officers need training.
That's what I want to know about. Can you tell us that? Can you guys take the conclusions of that conversation and put it into like a quick 2-paragraph written statement and share it with us? That's like what I'm asking right there. Okay. That's to be very, very, very specific. That was what I was actually asking. Now, what I ended up getting, I'm okay with the answer. Right, I'll take it. I'll take what I can get, but I still would love to know if I can get an answer on that. That's important. You know, he's sitting here saying that we make this decision, and then when the question comes back around, it's like, well, what do you mean by choose? It's like I was trying to be very clear. I don't know. I hesitate, I probably could have spent more time writing that question out. Again, it's all happening very fast and in real time. And at the same time, someone's accusing me of white male privilege, which yes, I have white male privilege, but that's not it's a mess. At any rate, this part of what I was asking never really got answered, but I want to continue to follow with this just for a sec.
And we assign them that training accordingly. We also get input from the officers. They're allowed to select 3 classes and submit those to myself and the captain review them, and we decide whether or not we're going to send them to a particular class. Obviously, if they put in for helicopter rappelling, we're going to deny that. So we try to make sure that it's practical and it's something that's needed here.
Yeah, can we just see what they ask? Can we just see the transparency on this whole process? I just want to see transparency on that whole process. That's it.
Question number 2, how long is the academy?
Okay, so now that I've sort of shown that segment and cleared up what I was trying to talk about, we'll hop back forward and do the deal with that in its actual state. So
A certified officer in New Hampshire.
I'm sorry, no, call. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say the follow-up classes, it starts to get a little bit complicated when you're asking for assessments because that's part of an officer's individual personnel record.
Not asking for the assessments, just asking for the choices.
A lot of that information can't be released. That's private. It's under federal Privacy Act. It's governed by federal Privacy Act.
Not asking for the grades.
It's
just asking for the classes they attended.
What their assessments were, what their grades were. But as far as what classes are available, Chief, I don't know if you can talk about that.
I have to check with the police academy on that. I'm not sure if they would permit me to release the training calendar or not.
Yeah,
That question may be best asked directly to the academy.
right.
And I can give her a phone number
For him.
if that would be helpful.
It's okay, man. I can be gender fluid.
Well, I think the
I don't care.
question though, Chief, as I'm hearing it, is wanting to know which of our officers have been trained in which things. You know, so kind of understanding the broad spectrum of what our force, you know, has been trained in. So
That's going to take some time. That's going to mean going through all of these files.
Oh no.
yeah, I think that that's the heart of the question. Is wanting
Okay.
to know kind of what our
Mhm.
officers are trained in. And maybe you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning, but just, and I think that this is really having to do with whether it's use of force or racial bias or cultural diversity or those of what's offered maybe in the last few years. What have our officers taken advantage of being trained in? And maybe we can identify them where we might be having some deficits. You know?
Great clear
Or
up from Karen on
feeling
that
like-
one.
It's going to take some time.
Oh
Okay.
no.
It's going to
I
mean
think
going
that's a
through
good
a
question.
lot
It's
of
harder.
files, but
I can
Yeah.
wait.
a list of basically who has had what for in-service training.
I think so.
I'll be patient.
And correct me if I'm wrong, whoever asked the question. I think, did that come from Carter?
Yes.
Carter
Yep.
Hammond, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, moving right down the list from Dylan James Brown,
Here we go.
quote unquote, policing was and continues to be systemically racist. This is a matter of history and fact. Why do you believe that the town of Peterborough needs to fund a racist organization? What will be done to defund and reallocate funds to alternative alternative responses?
Great question.
Wait, why is the town, it's a great question that the town of Peterborough funds a racist organization in our police department? No.
Mischaracterization.
No, what I'm saying is the great question is what do we feel like is the thing we need to do if there is something we need to do, right? So it's a broader question, you know.
It is a broader question, but we are aware of people of color in town that have had issues and have been intimidated, and so it's a valid question. Understandably, we're a 99 and plus % white town and a very small town, and these things may not be seen on the surface, but the people of color that have been affected have all validity in their concerns. And
I swear you
certainly,
can see Bill and the chief
this is
just
a
getting
question
redder
that
and
is-
redder right
is
here.
valid in today's conversation. So, but I don't know how to answer that. So,
Well, I guess I would just say this. We're living in a moment when everywhere in our country and even around the world, people are interested in taking the temperature of their police forces. You know, so where do we stand? I think it's a great question because we believe that we're doing a lot right, and we've got a lot of it right. I think there's always room for improvement, but we don't know where that might be unless we are willing.
And
to
she
really
does such a
look
good job
and
distilling
say,
this. Like,
what are we
such a
doing
good
well?
job.
What could we do better? And I think as the country is going through this process, we as a town also need to go through it because that's the responsible thing to do. And we might discover that we're better than we think, and that's great. Or we might discover that we're good up to a point, and then there are some things we need to change, and that's also great. But I think our being willing to...
She's about to say about willingness, and like, this is it, is the amount of willingness on the part of the police, the local government, to respond to these requests, these questions, without anger or frustration, to not assume them as attacks, as Bill did right there. I like Bill a lot, but he assumed it as an attack. Okay? And stating a fact openly like that, right? Stating a fact that, like, yes, the police is an inherently racist institution, right? Like, if you want to trace it all the way back in U.S. history, you know, like, It's not like the police were invented in like the 1970s. If they were, they'd still be a racist institution. But like, you can't just decide at a certain point that that's not where like police come from, right? Police goes way, way back to people, as Tyler points out in a bit. You're like pushing natives off of their land, like that. That's where that kind of stuff comes from. So don't get twisted, all right? And if the police have a negative response to even trying to engage in this dialogue, that's going to send up a pretty bright red flag to the citizens that they're asking a question that the police don't want them to be asking, which means there might be something underneath that they don't want to have to dig up. There might be something in that, like a skeleton in that closet they don't want to pull out. And it's our job to pull those skeletons out and deal with them, right? Doesn't make you a bad person to have a skeleton in your closet, but you can be a bad person if you go around pretending that it's not there. So, continuing.
Do the work to take a look is what is being called for right now. So that's why I'm reacting the way I am. And I believe that I don't think Chief is thinking differently. Like, I think we need to all be in this together, taking a really honest look and seeing what we could do better. That's all.
That is very well said. Thank you, Karen, and an excellent point. I think that one of the things we need to be careful of is not labeling our police department based on something that's happening elsewhere. Calling our police department a racist organization and why.
Okay, and this is it. Like, and I'm getting sick of this. Like, I'm just getting sick of this. And I have said it before. I like Bill. Okay, I actually like him. I think he's a really good guy. He's labeling them. He's taking what is an incredibly challenging question to grapple with and deciding that he's going to assume it's a blanket label rather than just accepting it, right? And it's like, and what, like, frankly, that's a function of guilt, right? If if somebody says something to you and they didn't mean it, yes, it's getting at something that's challenging, but it's not inherently an attack. It's just an attempt to grapple with a problem. If you assume that every attempt to grapple with a problem is in of itself an attack, then what you are doing is you are sending a signal that yes, you actually your frustrated denial of this could just as likely, out of just being upset, could absolutely be you covering for the fact that you haven't grappled with that problem yourself. Like, honestly, and that's it. Like, I'm gonna pull away from this, and I want to talk about this directly. Just like I'll go back to the full screen, right? So, in my opinion, the biggest problem that we as an area grapple with, right? Like, if I had to say what if there was something that we're all collectively afraid of, what is it? What are we all in this area collectively afraid of? And I think that's being embarrassed and being seen as wrong in a place where you should have felt like you knew better. About not knowing what you should have known when you're in a position of when you are in a position of authority, talking on that matter, right? People here are so terrified of being wrong. And because we're so terrified of being wrong, we don't ever but very rarely do we stop and inspect our role in perpetuating the problem. And if there is one challenge that I want to put out specifically to every single white adult, white, teenager, like anybody who's able to grapple with this, right? Even kids. I mean, this channel's not for kids clearly, but like, look, ask yourself, how cool are you with being wrong? Like, think about the last time that you were in a conversation and it became abundantly apparent to everybody in that conversation that you didn't know what you were talking about. How did you feel? How afraid are you of feeling that again? What lengths will you go to protect yourself from feeling that again? That's what I really want to get at with Bill right here. That's where labeling comes in, okay? Because at that moment, the easiest thing for us to do is to label somebody as, well, that was racist. Well, you're not an ally. I don't approve of what you said or what you did right there. And there's a huge part of me that wonders if when folks see that, when they see that happen, right? See somebody go out on a limb, see somebody willing to be put themselves in a position of being wrong, taking a risk, confronting their own biases, their own internalized racism, if, as an example. You see people go out and make a conscious effort to try and address that, right? And then come in and get involved and attack that process, or try to like talk about how problematic it is. Usually that's a function of the person who's trying to indicate the problematic nature not dealing with their own role in that problematic dynamic and being upset because maybe they see somebody who's going out and risking themselves in a way that like I don't know, maybe it's a type of like you feel like confronted by yourself in that moment because you feel like you should be doing, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's how Bill feels here. I know that I've had that type of interaction with plenty of people in this area over plenty of time. So, yeah, I think that's like, and I think for anybody that wants to learn more, and I'll post a link to this PDF. I've shared it like in a couple different places now personally, both publicly and privately, is a very good essay. It's not particularly long, about neoliberal racism and the implications of the Southern strategy. And the way I always try to frame it to people is like, look, understand that this paper itself stops with its historical assessment at the end of the Reagan administration. So what it doesn't include is the way in which the Clinton administration kind of consumed a lot of those like economic conservatist like perspectives and redistributed them throughout the Democratic Party. Then as the Overton window shifts through the 90s into the aughts and now into the 2010s, it's like everybody moves more right, Republicans become super, super right. And then the Democrats start to pull in like some of this never Trump, Jennifer Rubin type crowd that like are, that are just as hawkish and terrible as anybody else. Right. Like, and so that like kind of like woke labeling, and this is the criticism of Pelosi and Schumer, and I'm not going to get into the national shit, but frankly, like, if you want to understand sort of like the bedrock of this, I would say that's a great paper. So I'll get a link up to that. But I don't want to dwell on this portion of my point too much more. I'm just gonna let Bill continue. But this is what I would challenge. I mean, this is what I wake up and try and ask myself every day. Every time I get worried, I try to read more. I don't know. This is I find that the more that I try to like actively inspect this stuff, the more I learn, and I've never learned more about it than in the time that I've decided to really like address my own problematic natures. So we'll get back to this, but like, you know, don't focus on the other, focus on the self. Okay, that's sort of the chief thing there.
The town, I mean, that's just not in evidence. And it's not fair to label our chief and every one of our policemen that are out there doing everything they can to protect us and keep us safe all day, every single day, and responding to like way above and beyond what they should be, because there lacks the infrastructure to help people with mental health challenges, addiction challenges, and family challenges. I mean, there's just so many aspects of the whole entire issue that's going on that our police department is tasked with taking care of, because there's no statewide infrastructure to handle everything that people need. And I want to be very careful to not label our police department in a way that is not indicative of what they actually are. I mean, they're there every single day for us, and
it's important. Yeah, again, it's important to make that distinction that like what Dylan did was call out a racist institution that is the police in the United States, and is asking our individual police department to like, can you talk about your relationship to this institution, right? We're not labeling you. We're asking you to speak on the truth that is the historical racism of the police. Very, very different. Very, very different from actually casting the label on the officers themselves. And that's the most important distinction to make. And I understand why you wouldn't make that distinction if you're feeling reactionary, which is what's happening. Okay? That's that.
we need them, and we need them more than they are capable of providing us at a lot of times. So, I mean,
Yep.
Okay, so our town police department has my support till the day I die, because, you know, I wouldn't be here without them right now. I can say that with every degree of certainty. And we really need to make sure that they feel and know that they are supported by our town and its residents, because we're asking them to do way more than is even humanly possible. So
Exactly.
that's all. I just want to
Exactly. We are asking them to do way more than is humanly possible, and way more than they are even kind of trained to do. And that is why we say defund the police, stop giving them so much money, and instead let's hire some social workers. Let's hire some mental health professionals who are trained in the exact spaces of necessity that our community is seeking to deal with. If your argument is that our police are stretched so thin right now, then you should be 100%, you should be 150% on board with defunding the police, because it will help them by taking away what they're responsible for. It limits their purview. That's good for them. Okay? We can all be on the same team about this. And we don't need to switch the code of the conversation to just a reactionary, authoritarian, frankly, context. Because we live in a civilized society where we have seen the positive effects of social programs, and frankly, we can evolve. All right, we can be better than this. Like, we don't have to go. Like, we can learn to grow. If you're active perception of things is that we need to go back to a certain time. That's utterly regressive. And I'm sorry, but it shows the simplistic nature of the logic. And at that point, I just say do better. Like, just do better. Read more. I'm sorry. I know that sounds really pretentious and lame, but I say it to myself every day. Like, dude, you're not reading enough. You know, you're not learning enough. You're not exposing yourself to enough. And every single time I think that, I go out and I do more. How is this thing that I think isn't quite racist? How is that actually racist? Because other people have told me that, and why don't I believe that? And like, what got them there? What's the difference between my experience and your experience? What did you have that I didn't have? I'm gonna let this roll because he gets that in a sec.
So that they know that they're supported by us, because they have a way bigger job than they really should.
Well, I hear you, Bill.
Problem is systemic, well beyond our police force.
Yes. And I think that, part of what, we need to do as the select board is really think about how we can validate the experience of all community members, including our police, right? So we want to be able to create some kind of, process for having voices heard, right? All voices, and people understanding each other's point of view. So that's why the statement, and maybe this is a good segue to a statement I'm proposing that we adopt as a board. As Chief, I'm seeing maybe you have something more to say.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'm going to be quiet.
Getting back to Tyler, and the experience of perhaps a little more input from some of the residents that Tyler had mentioned would be helpful.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue. We have Zach Green asks, I would like to initiate a council of residents of the Monadnock region and Peterborough for police oversight and review spending, training, hiring practices over the past 5 years. Will the select board be willing to appoint or incorporate this council and be partnership with us? Now, I'd like to reiterate that no one's accusing Chief Guinard or any specific Peterborough police officer of
Guinard
any
wiping
of
that
these things
sweat off.
in this thread. But I think Mr. Dillon was alluding to the kind of the beginning of the police as it started as chasing slaves to capture them. We can all read the history of where the police department came from.
Shout out.
Just because we're all white here and we've had good experiences with the police does not mean that anywhere at any time a person of color cannot feel intimidated or may not. It's just the idea of police frightens people, and it may not be the person that is. I'm sorry to point out Chief Guinard. He happens to be here, right?
Okay. That's okay.
But
Hell,
it's not the person. It's that intimidation of the police force. And so,
yes.
So would we, as a select board? I don't.
Thank you
the specifics of that,
for
but
separating the men
do,
from the
Nicole?
symbol on that one. Boom. Exactly.
Just like the Heritage Commission or Conservation Commission, have a commission in town to study that, or?
Well, there is a statute for a police commission that does exist on the books. Certainly you could look into that.
I shared it in the
However,
group and I read it
the Peterborough
afterwards.
Police Department is reviewed annually by the town administrator, the budget committee, the select board, and ultimately town meeting when their budget comes up. You receive a presentation each year from the police chief talking about the work that they do. And
Whoop. Oh, heck. I wonder what happens. Oh, geez. Oh, geez.
Out of what's been going on, and let's see how it hits you. The members of the Peterborough Selectboard support all peaceful efforts to bring about change that makes our society more equitable for all. We condemn all violence against people based on skin color and stand with those who work for racial justice in our community and in our country. We are committed to hearing the concerns of our community and supporting constructive conversations that make policies providing for the equitable treatment for all who live, work, and visit the town of Peterborough. We promise to face issues as they arise and work towards continuous improvement in our response to community needs in an ever-changing world.
Well, how could anybody have a problem with that?
I don't know.
Sounds
Well, I
good.
don't.
Great.
I'll make a motion that we adopt that as our policy as a board. And I'd like just make the comment that as where it comes to policing in our police department and, establishing a police commission or board of commissioners, the way it is right now, it's essentially the three of us, Tyler, Karen, and myself, that are ultimately policing our police, right? And like with any other topic that comes up in town, we hit it head on, we address it, and we try to come up with the best solutions that we possibly can, no matter what it is. But certainly here I go, shaking the table again, sorry. But
It's okay,
no
Bill,
matter
we know
what
you're
it's
fired up.
related to, we hit it head on and we come up with the best solution that we possibly can. And we would do that with the police department, the fire department, the library, every single aspect of town, which we have been doing and will continue to do. And I think along with your statement, people should understand what a fabulous working relationship that the three of us actually have in town, and how well we listen to each other and what our concerns are and how we want to tackle them. And this particular topic of, the police department is no different from that. So thank you, Karen. Your statement is fabulous, and I make a motion that we accept it as our policy.
Thank you.
I'll gladly second that motion. It's very well thought out, and I appreciate that. Yes.
She did a good job with it.
Any further discussion?
I
No?
just want to say that, people may not realize this, but the last couple of years, being in town leadership is kind of like every day you don't know what you're going to be faced with.
This is it right
And,
here.
we're dealing with COVID, we're dealing with this every day, every week. So some folks may have felt like we should have come out with a statement sooner than this, but I have to tell you that it comes and you have to say, what is it we need to do now? And then we've got to be thoughtful and have a process. And so I just hope people understand that it's not that we've delayed in any way. It's just that we have to, it just keeps coming. It just keeps coming. And we do want to respond thoughtfully and appropriately. So
And we
really
as
appreciate people
quickly to that,
understanding
like,
so
I mean, we as people in town, like we gotta be respectful of that bandwidth. You know what I mean? Like, that's hard. And she's right. It's like we gotta be patient. I know that we're all upset, or a lot of us are upset. But we got to remember the pace of it. It's always going to be a factor.
that's all I want to say about it.
Yeah, and letting us work it out. Like, we have to get through this too. This is,
Yeah.
this is new for us, and obviously we have to see where the state goes with what's been happening, and we have to see what policies are become available to us to see how we can move forward. But with everybody that's, paying attention, just know that we are doing everything we can to move forward.
Right. Okay.
I think
And-
it's also important to remember that the town itself has been ahead on this issue as well. Just a few years ago in town meeting, we adopted essentially a code of ethics and conduct that would restrict town employees from judging a person based on their nationality, their religion, their ethnic background, and so forth. That's been incorporated into our employee handbook. Every employee of the town of Peterborough has to abide by it. So it's something that has come up before, came up a number of years before that when the town of Peterborough adopted its first code of ethics. And that's been incorporated into our code book as well. So this is an issue that's come up in the town. The town's been really ahead of this for such a small rural community. We really have, this has been in our eye for a long time as a community. So I don't want people to come away thinking that this is the first time it's been discussed by the select board, discussed by the community. It's happened before. So there's also a few questions left. I don't know if you want to get through those, Tyler,
Should we vote
before.
on that motion first?
Yeah, sorry.
Right, yes, so we had a motion, we had a second, and a
Okay, I just in the interest of time, I gotta move on here. Because like I gotta get stuff done. This is unfortunately not the only thing that I have on my plate for today, as much as I would love it to be. Oh well. So, I just, like, there is a section at the end where Bill, like Karen talks about how she doesn't know any of the cops. She knows Chief Guinard, but she doesn't actually know any of the cops. And Bill talks about how he knows all the cops all the time. And, after Karen says what she says, Bill just goes, that struck me that people don't know our police. And they did decide that they wanted to have community meet the police type of things. You know what I mean? So, like, I think that's a step in the right direction. I mean, this sort of is going to get into the whole the question of, do you just try and do these public forums, or do you try and actually form a police commission, which is something that we can absolutely do, and I think is even just worth running it by the town to see if it's something the town wants to do or not. You just make an act, like, we can get the ball rolling on that. So I'd say let's go with that. Okay. Wow. So that's a lot of towny stuff. As was previously stated, in the title of today's episode, it's the local show. And in the interests of, like, we spent a lot of time on that just now together. And okay, look, one of probably the most popular videos that I've even got on the channel at all was a breakdown of the podcast Live Free and Rant, our charismatic, if you'd like to use that word, local GOP chair and candidate for state rep as we speak, Chris Maidman, joining crypto connoisseur Joel Valenzuela on a weekly basis to talk about, like, very libertarian issues, and keeping in line with the whole defund or abolish the police movement. Our boys decided this week that they would get into it. And I know, like, this will be a little bit less, like, lasered and like, I would rather have fun with this segment, because, like, that's what you do when you're dealing with this kind of stuff. So, I've got maybe like 10, 12 minutes of these guys talking. Maybe I'll pause out in the middle of it. Maybe I won't, but, like, I do have the sort of, like, conclusion. And there's a challenge put out in this, and I would like to respond to that challenge. So, let's check in with our boys over at Live Free and Rant, shall we?
Here's the thing. I'd like to play with the idea of what do we do if we do get rid of police? You know, that seems like a lot of like boog boy mentality tends to sort of think like, oh, wouldn't that be great? So first off, we're talking
Just so for anybody, they're going to bring this up a lot because they love talking about these guys. But for anybody that doesn't know what a boog boy is, they're basically like gun-toting dudes. I'll see if I can pull up a picture. Yeah, it's short for Boogaloo Boys. Let's just see here. Okay, we'll just plop that right in so everybody can see. Here is typified by Hawaiian shirts and carrying guns and wearing tactical armor and like, you know, the typical people who would attend a reopened protest. Okay. Just so we all are on the same page. You know, I can't be bringing this stuff in without letting people know what everyone's talking about. These guys love these dudes, love just discussing them and thinking about them, and like, because everything is wrapped up in guns, and armaments and all that. So but I do want everybody, you know, if you don't know what a Boogaloo Boy is, this is a Boogaloo Boy. Okay, I will get back to the discussion at hand.
talking about acceptable risk and things like this. There's a cost to the current state of policing, a financial cost for sure. There's also a cost in human blood, where, I mean, obviously cops are supposed to kill bad people sometimes, or at least stop them. And that's, let's just not consider that blood, even though it is. But like, just the fact of people that didn't need to die or get hurt that do. Yeah, I don't know. That's a large savings that if we could look at a way of cutting that cost out, I think that we would be so much better off.
So
first
close.
Off, what do you think? What do you think about the prospects of getting rid of police completely? Before I go on one of my little ideological rants.
It's a hard
I'm
one,
not
man.
sure it's possible. Right? I mean, sure, like anything's possible, but I don't think even in, I mean, Minneapolis, they just voted to disband their police department.
Mm-hmm.
But Minneapolis would never be without police. The state police, the governor will send the state police in. The counties could send in county police if they have them. They could restructure, they could rename it something else. But, you know, I mean, cities like that, you get hundreds of murders a year, maybe, depending on which city you're in. Like Chicago, I know, just had 27 just this weekend. They have like 24 every weekend or every week. So who's gonna, and like, now I'm not a fan of how police interact in these in places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in general, like they're asked to do way too much. We create way too much crime, quote unquote, and now they pull people over for, you know, driving around without a seatbelt. Like, isn't there something better they should be doing instead of harassing people driving around that?
We're so close. Like, we're so close, fam. Like, oh my gosh. We're so like it's so funny to me that they can recognize the problem. Like, they're describing the problem like in like they're halfway getting it. Like, so close. Let's see if they get it.
That aren't wearing a seatbelt. Yes, there are way better things they should be doing with their time. Instead of, you know, harassing people selling illegal cigarettes in New York that ended up in somebody's death.
Okay. His name was Eric Garner. I'm sorry, bro. You can say his name. If you're going to bring it up, say his name. Also, bring up the fact that he wasn't even selling Lucy's at the time. He just had a history of doing it. He had done it before. You know what Eric Garner was doing that day? He was breaking up a fight. I don't know if your Boogaloo Boys would have done it. Maybe they would have. I don't know. But Eric Garner was doing that. Ridiculous. Ridiculous.
The crime, a victim. That's my stance on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're doing something that isn't affecting anybody else's rights, if you're not hurting them or taking their stuff or something along those lines, damaging their property, then it's not really a crime that you like, because every crime is either enforced at the end with jail or death. So when you make not wearing a seatbelt a crime, you're telling them that it's okay to put them in jail or kill them for not wearing a seatbelt because somebody with a gun is there enforcing that law. And well, people say, well, it's only a ticket. It's only a misdemeanor, or it's only a whatever kind of violation. But let's say, and we can go through the whole thing if we have to. I don't think we need to. I think people.
Oh, I think we do. So what I think is fascinating about this take, and it's like, this is the, this is the classic line, is that you want to talk about like they love to focus on they're going to throw you in prison, they're going to kill you. One of the two. Okay. But because these guys are so like enamored and just like licking the boot of the free market, right? Like they can't consider the they don't want to have the discussion about the ticket or the fine, right? But like that is what touches most people's lives. That's the dynamic that's the worst, right? Because none of those violent conclusions would occur if everybody was able to pay a fine, right? Or, like a tax. Okay, well, what's the problem with that? Oh, wait. That's a function of free market. Somebody can't pay a fine if they don't have the money because their job doesn't pay them enough. Right? They're not earning a living wage, so they're not able to catch up on debts or anything like that. So when an unexpected speeding ticket of $100 comes in, oh no, there goes my groceries for the week. Like, y'all just want to jump over to the violence aspect of it and not even acknowledge the fact that like the guns and the violence is inherently authoritarian. Like literally, like it is a symbol of authority. Okay, so like, and I think this is hilarious. There's no self-examination of the possibility that literally the act of holding a gun is authoritarian in of itself, right? There's no layer of inspection on that, and simultaneously there's a willful ignorance to the economic dimension of it. And if you want to have this, if Chris wants to have this conversation, I would love to hear him address the economic side of it, But I think I already know what he would say. I won't get too far into it. I'll just keep it rolling.
People understand the concept that, when you're not wearing a seatbelt and you make it a crime to not wear a seatbelt, then a guy with a gun is going to pull over your car and give you a ticket. And if you don't, blah, 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 you end up in jail or dead. So if we're going to have police, which we are, police are not going to go away. And I mean, there are people advocating to just abolish police, just like they were advocating to abolish ICE, just like they're advocating to abolish the U.S. military, just like they're advocating all of these crazy ideas. But instead of
I like his
abolishing the
discussion of
police. We should
like
focus their
equivalence
attention
there.
on what they were originally meant to do, which is to protect and serve and prosecute or investigate and arrest actual criminals like rapists, murderers, and crimes that have victims.
Yeah.
Not, Joe Schmo who's smoking a blunt on the corner, who's not hurting anybody.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where the concept of police is an invention. It's an invention made by human society to hopefully better the society and make things work. But as with every technology that's deeply rooted, every approach like that, there's ways of doing things better eventually, and sometimes you have to completely restructure your approach. Like, for example, if you live in a place with
we agree
public transportation that costs
we
way
need to
too much,
restructure our approach
and
completely.
you want a better way of getting around, like, you can't just say, well, ban trains, ban the subway because it doesn't work. Like, you have to also think, like, okay, what would happen? What would work in its place? Okay, well, maybe people would be able to afford more cars. Maybe people who wouldn't afford the cars.
I love
maybe
this
they could
part.
get into some kind of like volunteer ride sharing system, and like you could start like rethinking the whole structure.
How
One thing's
can
for
the
sure
free
that's very
market help
strange in
us?
this whole, when you think about where we ended up today, is police have sort of a dual role, and that means they end up doing one of them very poorly. They're kind of there for a couple things. The first thing that we always think about in a positive sense, anytime anyone says thank you first responders, any of this kind of rhetoric, when they're talking about that, they're talking about the role of defending the people, which is just protecting and serving, keeping people safe, chasing away criminals, all that kind of stuff, diffusing situations, making sure riots or protests don't turn into riots, things like that. That kind of stuff is one role, and it's completely different from the other role, which is to enforce laws. And
What?
they stand
No! Fundamental misunderstanding of the entire thing, right? Like, he's so close. Like, he starts out like in the exact right spot and then literally turns and describes the justice system. Okay? Police are the enforcement, right? Like, they're functionally, like, they go out, they do the research, and then the legal system is the part that, like, oh, like, I love that he's like Joel, your heart is in the right place right here, man, but it's just a misreading. All you're doing is describing the system that we already have. Okay, you're not describing the system that we should be getting to, because you're not acknowledging that you're still talking about a monopoly of force split between two things, and now you're asking for the police force to, like, not abide by laws? The fuck, dude? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm so confused. Do you want the police, like, or local militias or whatever, to just not have to abide by rules and just roll up and like monopolize force and threaten people like, hey, we don't like what you're doing in our community, so stop it or we're going to point a gun at you? Geez, that sounds like a problem to me. That sounds like an authoritarian problem to me. And you're going to take that and you're going to separate it? You're going to separate it from a justice system, which actually has, like, rules and measures and ways to check those things? Like, no way, homie. That's not what we're talking about. Okay? And, like, again, it's like it's this concept that, like, the gun leads to the liberty without acknowledging that the gun is a symbol of authority, and it's like in of itself, right? A weapon is an authoritative object, like, from, like, a philosophical and conceptual level, right? And it's like, and that's the thing I love about libertarians, is the cognitive dissonance, that, like, short circuit of, like, it's my individual right to be authoritarian. Okay, then you're an authoritarian, homie. That makes you not a libertarian. I don't know, like, just like I'm happy to have the conversation, but like, describe to me how you deal with that philosophical dynamic, because I just like, this point makes absolutely no sense to me. I really like, I cannot follow it, but I will continue to play it anyways, because I can tell that Joel means well.
Metrically opposite a lot of ways. So, for example, that's why there's 911 immunity laws being passed or bandied about or whatever. It's because a lot of times people will they will call the cops, they'll call the ambulance or whatever if a friend of theirs is overdosing, but they don't want to because they will be arrested for using illegal drugs. Which again, that's a whole nother discussion of terrible laws being in place and things like that. But there's the dual role of the police or of the public servant in this case, first responder, to protect and serve or to enforce laws. And they can kind of be at odds with each other. Now, if you have a angry drunk person screaming around in the streets and you want to keep, and he's like brandishing a sharpened stick or something like that, and you need to do something about that. First off, if you want to not cause trouble, if you want to actually stop that from being a problem, there's a completely different approach from the law enforcement approach. So
he's right.
If you go in, you just say, "Oh, listen, man, calm down. There's nothing to be excited about. Can you just put the stick down? We'll sit down next to you. You look hungry. Let me get you a food. Let me sit next to you. What's going on with your life, man?" And just defuse the situation. Now, of course, if in the struggle,
he just described a social worker, man. He literally just described, you can hire mental health professionals and social workers that are like trained in dealing with addiction to do exactly that. You can put them on the payroll. It is their job to deal with those idiots, and you don't have to like involve the violent aspect. Okay.
Or he hits the cop or whatever, he backhands him, whatever. Like, if I don't have to worry about enforcing laws and I'm that person, I just, shrug it up like, "Hey, wait, whoa there, big guy." But from a law enforcement's perspective, you just backhand an officer, you assaulted an officer, let's put the knee in the back and put the cuffs on. We got to like charge him with all these things now. It's a completely different mindset, and I think those roles need to be completely sort of separate. And a lot of it is, I think we have way too many.
Yeah, I do too, man.
Of course,
I think those roles need to be separate too.
Specific opinion, but I think we have way too many police because they need to enforce laws. As in, that's but I don't think they do, but you know what I mean. They need the job description is to enforce everything that's a law, and it's sold under this: we need to protect the people. So you have a lot of people that are doing just like the one thing, and they're kind of stretched too thin to do whatever. What I would like to do is just separate the two roles, have community protection, whatever, and have like a role that's just for protecting people and keeping them safe, and another role which is just for prosecution. It's like bounty hunt, kind of like
sense.
You say sheriff and deputies and citizen militia on the one hand.
Like, that is exactly what we already do. You just
patrols, that kind of stuff to keep everyone safe.
You're describing the justice system except without police having rules to follow. That's what you just described, buddy. Like, I'm not for that at all. Not even remotely. That's more authoritarianism without a check. Terrible idea. Terrible, terrible, terrible idea. Super, super pro-authority. Super anti-liberty. Just like because you care about guns, like the right to guns and militia. Like, it's just so like, oh God, the cognitive dissonance is wonderful.
Completely different, and they don't need to care about enforcing laws because that's not their job. And on the other hand, you would have like prosecutors and bounty hunters and things like that, right? People that go,
what?
And, we heard this person's this. We have evidence that this. We're gonna hunt someone down, and we're going to, put them in jail for whatever. which of course my hidden agenda and all this is a lot as that second role I would like to just be able to mostly do away with completely, just or almost get rid of. But in the meantime, just separate the two of them. So that way, if you see a cop walking up to your door, if it's the one kind, you're like, oh, I can trust this guy because he's here to help me out, whatever. Or, if I'm, he's primarily there to help me and help keep the community safe. And not, oh, this guy's coming for me because that's what he does. He hauls people away in chains. So having those two different things, now you have all of a sudden people start trusting police again. If they're not mistrustful, oh, they you work with communities. There isn't this whole divide in the communities if you just have those two separate roles. And generally speaking, this is one thing that I don't think that people really think too much through when they people say, for example, what if I get laid off from my job? What am I going to do? I need unemployment. Okay, maybe, but think outside the box a little bit. What do you do if there is no unemployment and you get laid off from your job? What would you do? What would you figure out to feed yourself and your family? Well,
I'll tell you, Joel, because I was there. You turn to your community and you ask for help. You turn to your friends, you turn to your family, you turn to the food bank. That's what you do. Community.
Well, I better start selling things. Maybe I'll find some stuff on eBay, buy it for cheap, and package it and resell it at a markup. Maybe I'll start doing it. Well, just start a business, landscaping and stuff. Maybe I'll all the opportunity, the things you could do to still feed your family.
Because the solution is totally a free market one.
9 to 5
you can't.
And are not going on unemployment, that all of a sudden, what would you do if you had no choice? And I think we should try to think about that as far as policing is concerned, where if just don't be like, oh, don't buy on police, it's terrible. Okay, well, think of the idea. What would you do if the police didn't exist? What problems do you have? And what solutions could you find to those problems? You'd be surprised at stuff you could come up with. And I'm encouraging people to kind of take that analytical view and just see what replacement for the concept of police that we have in our modern society could we possibly create that could possibly be different and better.
Okay, awesome. That's and he just gets around to it, and that's been the theme of the whole damn episode is social work. Social workers. Community solutions. Socialism. That's what most people do. That's you're talking about unemployment. There's different versions of that, right? We could create a town fund. You could create a community fund where people just sort of have a rainy day piggy bank that, you can go to that community and you can get some financial help. You can talk to your neighbors. You don't have to do everything through the free market. Okay. And I know that's the way that they want to look at everything, but it is not helpful. It is not helpful to looking like you know what you're talking about when you're literally ignoring the exact response because you just hate the word communism. Without for a second realizing, or maybe you are and you just choose to ignore it, that the root word of communism is community. And with that, I'm going to end for today. My dog's whining. I got to take him out. But I love you folks. Have a great day. Enjoy yourselves. Please tune back in tomorrow for the conversation with Lena Barbosa. It's going to be really good. And I'm just, again, looking forward to more of this discourse, looking forward to just spending time with people. If you got questions, you got gripes, anything, you want to debate me, you want to just have a conversation, hit me up. Let's work it out. Okay. So, everybody, I just, take care, enjoy yourselves. Check out the latest Trail Walks video because that just went up yesterday. I know that I've been a little bit slow to the uptake on it, but yes, I did get a new one up. Evans Trail, you can go check it out. New little beat behind it. It's good stuff. So, thanks everybody, and I'll catch you tomorrow.